Hey, how's it going?
Hey.
I feel like I have weird lighting here. I'm gonna maybe adjust this down a bit. Let's give it a couple of minutes and I'll just pull up the documents that I should have pulled up before. Long time no see, Eben. How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
Good, yeah. I was gonna say let's just give it one more minute. And the topic for this week is identifying and researching open questions. And I didn't actually have any preparation because I didn't think about it, except saying that I would lead us in a conversation about it. So that's cool. But that's where we're gonna keep notes and kind of aiming for more compressed notes than our usual very loquacious ones. Is someone able to be a note taker for this week? Awesome. Okay, I saw Jess, but maybe Jess and Ray, if you want to like help each other split halfway or something, that would be great. Yeah, okay, well, why don't we go, we'll start just because we only have 30 minutes and I know Matt Price is gonna try and join today, but he has a class that ends. And we are supposed to start by going through introductions. I think everyone on the call knows each other, so we can skip that. But I want to just give a moment to say, if you don't know everyone on this call, could you raise your hand? Okay, cool. And then wanted to ask if people had like some really brief announcements or things that they'd like to mention here. We kind of said bullet point updates, so like very succinct. And it's totally okay if there aren't any. But I have an announcement. So I'm part of a group of people. We organized this event here in Toronto last year called State of Our Networks. It was January 2017, so long ago. And we had wanted to make it an annual thing, but January 2018 was very hectic. And we have set a time and we have a CFP and everything up. It's about to be live probably tomorrow. And it'll be July, right? The weekend before Hope in Toronto. My pitch is that you should all come to Toronto and go to this conference, and we're going to do like community billets and try and figure out a way to make it cheap. We're going to have sprints after. There's a computer museum. There's 2 computer museums. We can do field trips. I don't know. I'm getting excited. Cool. So I'll make sure to share widely when that CFP is on the website, which should be tonight or tomorrow. So the topic for this week, and I hope this could be really conversational, is wanted to have a roundtable discussion about identifying and researching open questions about decentralized web. And the sort of background to this was sort of a couple open questions that came up during the February coordinating call. So these are in the GitHub issue. So one being like how, and I think the one we were most excited to talk about and understand was like sort of how the language of like using possession is going to transfer to when we're talking about decentralized web stuff. But all of us, or many of us in the chat, had said, I want to read more, or I would need to know more before I could like ask that. Another one was, how can we set decentralization up for justice, which to me is like a really important question. Thinking about governance strategies that exist that we should seek out to think about how governance works on the decentralized web. And so the other background to this is in August, we had suggested at the first in-person meeting we held that we set up kind of like a reading group or figure out modes of like collecting research materials to try and give ourselves stuff to look to for insight and examples and kind of think of a structure around that. So I'm just putting out there, potentially a reading group has been something on our plate for 6 months now. But yeah, what do you all think? And I can keep stack, but I thought today we could think about how we want to approach researching these rather than get into a deep dive on any of them because it's not enough time. So Ray, I saw you first. Go Ray.
Like definite +1 on the reading group. I'm super excited about that idea. I read actually the decentralized web report from MIT that you had mentioned. And that might be a really good starting point. The executive summary is really good and concise, but then if you want to read the rest of it, and just, you know, there's like the IPFS stuff particularly, the other things are interesting, but maybe not mandatory, but I don't know how like draconian we want it to be, because it's 100 pages. And some of us aren't academics, so we're not used to reading. Document them on, just kidding. But I would love to talk to everyone in this group and others about the document because it's really interesting. And it's actually technical, but not too technical. And I think we could get a lot out of it, or I would at least. So that's a nomination for the first piece, potentially. I'll find a link. Hold on.
Awesome. Yeah, a link to that paper would be amazing. You're muted, Don.
Sorry, I just noticed Ed is on the call and not usually on the call. So I'm wondering if when we talk, we could just say like something about where we're from or like where we're coming from, just to provide a bit of extra context. So go, Brendan.
Hi, my name's Brendan. Ed, I think we've met it through certain digital stuff, but yeah. So to speak to the point, yes, I totally want to read the thing. I'm so behind the idea of a reading group, particularly if it helps me stay on top of stuff that like if we could do a little bit of like, hey, let's scatter and read, and like everybody tackle a different thing and summarize. If any of that happens, I'd be so into that just because I have more things to read than time to read them. And you're all really smart. And so it'd be great to have somebody do that. The other thing I just wanted to surface is like we have been doing, I think Mike Huka, I really wish he was on this call as we sort of speak to surfacing questions because I pasted a link in chat. He has actually, if we go to datatogether.org/research, that's where we've been accumulating a number of fairly technically oriented research topics, which is just like, what kind of web crawlers exist? What decentralized technologies exist? And like links to actual GitHub repositories and stuff. And he does an incredible job of like landscape analysis on that side. And so I think one of the things we might want to surface is like actually just augmenting that work or coming up with a way to make it easier to contribute to that work and by sort of servicing the process in some way or another. But yeah, his work in there is great. I'd really encourage you to take a look if you have some time. Oh yes, and the data frame is from data resilience. So maybe we need to like think about that. Like we've sort of been framing it as just like folders inside of that research repo, I think. Yeah, fairness in data is a topic in there. It has nothing in it. Link for Mike's research repo is here. I will repaste it again in the chat. Yeah, there we go. Cool. That's all me.
Yeah, no, I think that sort of like understanding the landscape seems really important. That seems like something that could be a little distinct than sort of deep engagement with like a couple texts or to try and understand an idea.
Totally. Yeah, and I sort of wanted to speak to we could broaden the purpose of the research repo with whatever we needed, right? Just to say that it's there. Mm-hmm. Doesn't need to just be lists of stuff. It could be actual in-depth analysis of something.
Maybe a second question I have, and I think about a lot as I throw all my hours into a reading well, is how do we make sure what we read informs what we do? So thinking about a reading group or thinking about this research repo, how do we pull insight from that into the stuff that we're going to be doing together?
I think we haven't done much organizing as we've kind of shifted from like the quick response, of last year to this new mode. Although maybe recently in New York, we have gotten together several times. Actually, it was really nice. Protocol Labs hosted a small dinner last week. But I wonder if like how we go from what we read to put into practice is through, as we switch into the long mode, to keep our listening ears on to like what it is in the world that we're responding to with these various approaches. And I guess I'm saying like that I feel like what was so successful about our combined critical response, technological response, and social organizing response, and probably some other dimensions too, of last year was that it was like really tuned in. And so it's that kind of like listening and tuning in to situations and needs and, including ambiguities that I think is going to help us continue applying, not only our existing expertise and experience, but these new readings to what we do. What do you do? Is that specific enough? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Go, Brendan, and then I can follow up.
I'm into it. I would take it in the more specific direction of like, I specifically want to talk more about like governance, like governing models and what does that mean? What do we mean when, hey, what's up, MP? And I think a balance of concrete is, yes, totally listening ears, but like for me, I'm hungry for active solutions. And so just don't want to lose sight of that as well. So it's like, yes, listen, but also do aggressively without listening. I don't know. Terrible. LB, I hear you. And I just want to like accumulate some really good, like personally, I really want to accumulate governing strategies and models and get a list of them and figure out why they won't work on the DWeb and how they look in code. Like I want to see what that looks like. And now by in code, I mean like a bunch of like wireframes of how that interaction would work and how that might feel. And I'm totally cool to take it into that direction, but starting from a good, well-grounded philosophy of justice and governance. I don't know if that was constructive.
All I was going to say, sort of in response to your question was, and maybe feeds into what Brendan said, was what I heard from that and what I feel like I would personally love and benefit from is like the way that you can set up like reminders in like how you run meetings or how you do your work or whatever that kind of force you to do some of that listening. So I think we have pretty good like meeting flow, but I could be better. But I mean more like that just made me think more about like kind of organizing strategies where, like you set a shared understanding of like rules before the meeting and stuff like that. And I'm wondering if there are things around that we would want to establish for like data together. Like I kind of want us to have a more clearly defined mission. So I feel like that'll help me know what I'm listening for or like where I need to listen, Go, Eben.
I totally agree with that, like especially a defined mission, and also what Liz said in terms of like defining on what we want to get out of the discussion or how to keep the ball moving forward. And maybe one option for that is like, I don't know what it is, but it's like pre-discussion questions or like questions that we have about data together that we're trying to answer with this reading material, like whatever that is, whether it's a paper or a book or whatever, but like even as we're going along or as we're starting that kind of stuff, just to kind of like frame what we're hoping to get out of like discussing this topic. And I don't know if that's like a GitHub issue, if that's like a thread on Slack, like I don't know what that is, but it might help to have like something to start.
Matt, do you want to expand on your chat comment?
Well, I mean, a syllabus is usually a tool for guiding a discussion through a set of, sort of mandatory points of passage, right? So if you have a set of questions that seem like are foundational to the topic, you want to make sure that everybody in the room has had a chance to think about those topics. That's what the syllabus does. It organizes the conversation around those questions. So we could use something like we could use a GitHub issue or a Hackpad as a way to collectively script that conversation. That's all.
Just to say that we already have a couple questions, and maybe I don't think that's exhaustive. So I feel like there's already questions that we've been slowly like rolling around collecting, and I feel like we could generate more before sort of doing a bit of like grouping and clustering maybe.
Totally. I think generating more in this call. Is that what you're hoping?
I think we should, because it's fun to do it when we're all together.
Totally. Yeah. And can I go? Sorry, I totally just jumped in.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, like I would personally like to see patterns for group negotiation. And I know that sounds weird, but like one of the common tactics with the distributed technologies is like you can't get an image of the entire network. It's just too burdensome to be connected to everybody at the same time. And so there's this, you immediately fall into this thing where you have to negotiate groups. And from a technical perspective, that's something that you sort of want to see happen. And a lot of that happens just sort of randomly and algorithmically. And there's a really wonderful protocol for that. Who cares? What's more interesting is that like there's a social side to that, right? Like group negotiations from a social perspective, what does that mean? And and along what axes do groups assess, associate, disassociate? And I think it's a huge component that's really overlooked when we start talking about distributed pieces, because if we had better terminology and a better understanding of how to form a group from a social perspective in a way that creates sufficient amounts of difference or variety in opinion, and at the same time creates has enough capability. So like, in technical terms, that's like uptime or availability or resources. If you can sort of compose groups cleverly, I think that's a really, really powerful technique. But I wonder about the governance of who should be the decider of that group composition and how does that work? So those are huge questions that are burning through my brain all day long.
Go, Liz.
Brandon, I got most of your comment in the notes. If you could add the details, that would be awesome. Yeah, this is a super groundbreaking topic. What Don and Brendan just said, as open source communities kind of grow out of the kind of social structures and decision-making structures that have been more like clubhouses or like professional associations, or else just it's broken down into yelling match, getting towards running like a society, and ideally like a better society, more utopian society where like listening at scale can really happen. This is super edgy and emerging right now. Anyways, just to support this.
I'm just going to invite but not require. If anyone hasn't added anything to the conversation but wants to, please feel free. Liz, are there questions? Or like, I feel like Liz or Brendan, in response to kind of that exchange, I feel like, could you suggest a couple, like, really narrow questions to kind of help me like, I think I'm floating a little bit above what you're saying. So if you, like, if there's like a question or two around it, that would probably help me like think through it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we talk a lot about communities holding data together. And so for me, the question is, okay, we're going to have communities holding data. Who are the communities? How do I identify the communities? How do I draw a circle around a community in a way that's fair and equitable? And then on the internet. And then how do we negotiate holding data across them? For me, that's the big one, right? It's like, we got to pin a bunch of data and we need to make it up and available. That's mine.
I think those are great. I think I just think of all these questions about like, what is data?
Right,
that,
and that's
do not need to come in exactly, but I wonder, like, I wonder a little bit, and I think would be helpful for us to think about community, because I feel like the way people talk about community, and this is just me drawing upon how people write about community networks and like mesh stuff, there's like sort of there are these like overlapping but distinct communities, and so there's like a lot of power in understanding like how that term is being used. So that's a question I have, but not raised as a question.
Yeah, I think how disentangled those can be, like how much can you pull those questions apart and examine them separately is a big concern of mine. Liz, you had something.
Oh, yeah, kind of wondering, like, I know that this kind of structure about like communities holding data together, this was a huge reason, like a huge direction that this group evolved towards. And I'm trying to sort out how to say this, because I would like us not to be in the position of figuring out technological solutions for people who aren't here having a problem we don't really understand. And I'm also not trying to be a block. But I'm definitely getting a feeling like this might not be the problem that this group is going to solve, like this. That potentially we have so much ground from where we are right now, which is like from where we started a year ago with archiving, that, the initial haphazard approaches, which thank God we did them, but we needed to move to a content addressable, decentralized web. We needed more hands on the government data. Like, we're so good on that. And we're just starting to break ground now on like working with smaller subsets. So working with groups that are already clearly defined, like institutions. Those are groups we can draw a circle around, and they are coming to us with clear situations. And I guess I just feel like there's so much work, so much progress we can make just working in those circularly defined communities that, like, I don't think we're ready to answer Brendan's question. And that if we were to try with our current group composition, we would fail. What do you guys think about that?
Go Ray.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it's sort of like something that can happen in parallel. I mean, we want the big questions in our mind because it's so easy just to like think about solutions without the big picture. And then if you don't, sometimes you get trapped with just thinking like you're constrained by the solution set that you're working on. And so, maybe it's okay to sort of work on the work in front of us and pursue that while always asking the bigger questions, even if we don't have the answers to them. Like, I don't necessarily think it's either or.
Yeah, I agree with that with Ray, that it's not either or, because I'm not in academia, so I'm not in one of those smaller circles that you potentially would be like the first target, but I still care about like community and data and that kind of like relationship. And that's still a question. It's not like a question that we can solve today or tomorrow, but it's still nice to have that question as like a goal to like where we're going towards. So.
I have a thought, but then I'll just say after this maybe one or two more, and then move into like closing up and identifying where all these great ideas should go. I agree, or I think feel really similar, Liz. I would say to kind of Ray and Evan's point, I don't think, and maybe I misunderstand, how I interpreted what Liz said, it was not that we could not and should not ask questions about communities we're doing stuff for, but more like how we understood the work that we were doing. And I totally agree with this notion of we can ask big questions that are not very granular about work that we're doing, but I think we can be very, like, I think there's a way we could be more clear on defining our initial like area that we're working in, that I think we've been sort of still figuring out. So yeah, maybe just 1 to 2 parting thoughts. And again, for people who have said less, if you want to say stuff, please feel free. But no worries. Yeah. And then Brendan, I feel like I stepped over your spot. Yeah, go.
No, totally. But Matt had a thing. Matt, you go. Okay. Yeah, I just want to say I completely agree. I think that scale of what is a community is a pretty big question, and maybe it's worth backing a little bit away from that. And I think that's a really good point, Liz. Like that, the question of how big a scope can one take on or should take on is really important. And I'd like to. I sort of see that and think that thinking along the lines of communities that we have more direct knowledge with makes a lot more sense, and trying to understand that and serve those needs. And if the patterns generalize, cool. But like, I could see how over a long time horizon, if we could get more and more people involved, bigger tent, more communities, then we can get there. But yeah, I completely agree. I think stepping back towards something that we have a more concrete foundation in makes a ton of sense.
Go, Matt.
I think maybe thinking about like, what do we offer people who, where are we positioned to help communities, I think is the other thing. You know, like I think one thing to think about is like, do people come to us ever? And if they come to us, what do we say to them? You know, like we have technology to some extent to offer, and maybe we have a conversation. I mean, that's one way where like a syllabus document is kind of cool. Like these are the things, these are the things we're thinking through, right? You know, and there, we may have like mission statements and stuff like that as well, but also, you know, this is what we think the problem space is and how we interface with it. That can be a thing that we offer people.
So then just in the last minute, could we, the goal is to do some wrap up and identify to-dos and review upcoming meetings. So we have next week lined up for a topic, which is Matt Zed demoing some sort of reconfigured RFC decision-making process. And then we have our March coordinating meeting. And then it's open. So I would encourage any and all of you to think about what would be a decision, roundtable kind of discussion, not decision, that you would be up for leading. So that's 1. 2, for to-dos. Because of the limited time, is it okay if I pitch this and then see what people think? It feels like there's a few to-dos. One is kind of provide some sort of venue to collect more questions that we have. 2, kind of reading group everyone is super keen on, but also Matt P is sort of talking about building a syllabus out of it. And there's this like ridiculous example from like these people who read through all the systems thinkers and then wrote a book from the Open University, which we could perhaps use as a model. So I can revisit and drop that. It's like a very dry book. So I will not ask anyone to read it. And the other thing I was hearing was some of the, something around like mission or like kind of scoping, which feels quite large, but I'm wondering if that's something that we want to really understand how we can engage with at our March coordinating call. I'm seeing nods for that. So I think the mission scoping aspect and maybe to raise elevator pitch, those are like questions we want to have and make space for on that agenda. But for the other two, setting up a place to collect questions, does anyone interested in taking that on? And then, or is anyone interested in taking on sort of thinking through a reading group as a syllabus structure and kind of proposing it? Pat Kahn and Matt P had been tangentially interested in that, or like had been sort of interested in that in August, but that was a long time ago. So there's some prior art that I can point you toward. Okay, so Matt P, sounds like you're still a little bit interested. Would someone else want to help with that? Liz, are you?
I was trying to say something about the question place.
Go.
Public Lab is a community that focuses on knowledge production, starting by questions. And we have comments and answers, kind of like Stack Overflow, but like, it's really like, we move from question and answer into like making stuff and that addresses real world problems in like a organized fashion. That's sort of the whole thing that we do. So I'm offering the publiclab.org/questions for people to poke a stick at, see if they like it.
That sounds great. I think we have things itemized. So we're going to use the publiclab.org style thing. We're going to test it. And then we have Matt P and me, sorry, on reading group stuff. Matt, maybe we could sync up in Toronto over that. I don't think it's like super urgent. Great. I have a thing that I'm late for, so I'm gonna run, but you all can stay. It's lovely to see you all as always, and I'm really excited to learn about this. And thank you, note takers.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and apply to come up to Toronto in July for our networks. That's the final pitch.
Post the thingy.
I will.
All right, I'm gonna roll as well.
Okay, it's nice to see everybody.
Good to see you guys.
Yep. Bye.
Bye everyone.